Okay. This week we are talking about chapter 9, which is our assessment chapter, evaluation chapter. And I do like this chapter because it's a lot of what we do in the diagnostician world. And so we're going to talk about some of those topics in depth. We're going to go over the PowerPoint. And I think that the quiz is pretty easy this week. But I'm also the teacher, so I guess I think most of them are pretty easy, but I think this one is easier than the rest. It's got a lot of true false on it, and I'll take a quick peek at it here in a minute and see if there's any real the difficult ones that I think you might need help on, but I think most of them are pretty straightforward. But let's go ahead and begin with the PowerPoint. And again, this is chapter 9. So here we are, identification, assessment, and evaluation. I don't think well, this is a pretty good quote. It's in your book and here on the slides as well. Let me move. I need to adjust my my screen a little bit there. If the IEP fails to assess the child's present levels of academic achievement and functional performance, the IEP does not comply with the IDEA. This deficiency goes to the heart of the IEP. The child's level of academic achievement and functional performance is the foundation on which the IEP must be built. Now, this brings to mind to me a conversation I had with one of my interns this last week. I've been making intern visits over the last couple of weeks. And my interns right now are spread out all over the place. I've got one in Waco ISD, one in Gatesville ISD, one in Maypearl, several in the Metroplex area, 2 out in the Comanche County Co-op, which is in De Leon, out west of Stephenville. So they're just far flung. But it's so interesting to me to get to visit with them on their home turf and see some of the issues that arise at the local level. I had 2 diagnosticians in rural districts tell me that teachers were not coming to ARD committee meetings with their PLAFs, their present levels of academic achievement and functional performance. And if you're not a special educator, that may not mean very much to you. But if you're a special educator, you know that teachers are supposed to come to ARD committee meetings, or they're actually supposed to have them before they come to ARD committee meetings. They're supposed to come to ARD committee meetings with the acronym PLAAFP is PLAF, is that present levels of academic achievement and functional performance. That's how the child is actually doing right now in their classes. So those present levels are what the teacher is going to report on how the child is doing. And then their goals and objectives for the coming year. Those are the things that the teacher is supposed to, or the teachers are supposed to come to the meeting with, be prepared for their part. And so when teachers are not contributing those elements to the ARD committee meeting, or the IEP meeting as we would call it in other states, then they haven't done their portion of their job for the child's ARD committee meeting. And as it says right here, in this decision, if the IEP fails to assess the child's present levels of academic achievement and functional performance, then the IEP does not comply with the IDEA. I'd like to waive that in the face of teachers who don't come prepared with those things to the IEP, because an IEP is not a valid a document until it's got those things embedded in it. And as I said to one of those interns, well, you can't leave an ARD committee meeting without a valid document. And if your teachers haven't brought those pieces to go into the document, then you have not had a legally constituted ARD committee meeting. It goes on to say there, the deficiency goes to the heart of the IEP. That's the very element that we build the IEP around, is how is the child doing? What's happening in their academic profile that we're going to construct the IEP around. Now, most of us have had experience with IEPs being written prior to an ARD committee meeting rather than in the ARD committee meeting. And that's for the purpose of time saving. But in fact, we could walk into an ARD committee meeting with a completely blank tablet of paper, and that would be the legal way to do it, and write everything out there and construct that IEP from scratch with the input of our teachers, our evaluation personnel, our parent, if the child is old enough, then their input as well, and whoever is a contributing member of that IEP team to help us build that IEP from the ground up. And if we don't have information about what's going on with the child in their classes right now, then we don't have the basic foundation for building that IEP. So I think this is a great comment, and one that we need to share with teachers. Their part of that IEP is critical to the building, and we can't build it without that foundation. And so I'm sure that I don't remember the details of this Kirby versus Cabell Board of Education. But that's probably what happened here in this case, is that people were not contributing all of the elements that were needed beforehand to develop the new IEP. So we've got decisions that need to be made as part of that assessment process. And we've got decisions all along the way. If you were to have a decision tree, it would have lots and lots of forks in it, and lots of places where you need to branch out and make decisions. You've got those that happen at the pre-referral stage. Now, this is where, and again, all of you on the screen tonight are in the diagnostician program, but not everybody in the class is. But for the benefit of you all, these are conversations that we have in that program and in that class, those classes as well, that are really relevant to what we're doing right now in this class. Because I'll say, and as I've already said in there on the Saturdays that we've had together, and I'll continue to say for the next number of weeks that we have, you're going to find that things are done a little bit differently amongst you all from place to place. And, you know, Tanika will say, well, here's how we do it in Crowley. And then Melissa and Lindsay will say, well, now, wait a minute, we do it this way in Granbury. And then Megan will say, well, now, wait, down in Dripping Springs, we do it this other way. And that's not to say that any one of those is right or wrong. They can all be valid and legal and be a little bit different, but we've got to make sure that the procedure that we are using is legal, and that it follows the letter of the law in affording the child all of their rights as part of that pre-referral process, and their parent as well. So, you know, all of that, like I told you, the legal framework is a really good guide for all of this. It tells you all of the the I's you've got to cross, the I's you've got to dot and the T's you've got to cross in every bit of the process. But pre-referral is the very beginning of it. So, who can make a referral? Well, parents can make a referral, teachers can make a referral. I've heard of some places where parents put a bug in, where teachers put a bug in parents' ear and say, you need to refer your child. If you go ahead and start the ball rolling, it'll happen a lot sooner than if I do. Of course, that's not a real cool thing to do. Not terribly professional or ethical, in my opinion. But I think that happens in a lot of places where parents and teachers kind of collude to make timelines work in a special way. There are entitlement decisions, and your book talks some about that. Things that that students are in fact entitled to as part of the process. Programming decisions that are made along the way, and then all of those accountability and outcome decisions that are made as we proceed through the assessment process. So we've got a flow chart here. Let's say a teacher refers a student to the multidisciplinary team, and then the multidisciplinary team has to decide if a special education assessment is needed. Or the multidisciplinary team then will seek parent permission to assess, and then you get informed consent, and then the assessment is conducted. Now, the process here changed a few years ago when we had a debate, particularly here in Texas, as to when your timeline started. And we had a lot of districts that were being found out of compliance because of the date that they officially began the timeline. And the timeline actually starts now. We got some clarification on this. And the timeline begins when the district says they have received the informed consent. And so it's not the day that the parent returns it to school. It's not the day that the parent signs it. It's not the day that Johnny takes it home in his backpack. It's the day that the district receives it officially. And so your district probably has a stamp that they put on the paperwork that says, okay, it's officially received by the district today. And then that's when your timeline begins. And that's the date that you, as a diagnostician, certainly would need to know that your timeline has started, and you need to start counting your days from that date. As a diagnostician, you want to know when that date is, because everything you do after that hinges on that date. What used to happen was maybe Johnny brings it back to school and turns it into his teacher, and then the teacher sends it down to the office, and it sits on the assistant principal's desk for a few days, and then eventually it makes its way to the special ed office, and mom signed it, last Friday when it first went home, and then maybe didn't even get it back to school for several days. And so that date that it was signed was the date that people started the timeline. Well, sometimes that could be 2 weeks before the diagnostician ever got her hands on it. So all those days were lost. And people said, wait a minute, we're not doing this in a smart way. And so we came up with this procedure, and TEA approved it, and we put it into rule, into policy, that this is the way we start our timelines when informed consent is received. And this hasn't, it's probably been 10 or 12 years that we've been doing it this way. Probably 12 years or so. I remember I was in a district when this happened. I was not at the university yet. And then you conduct your assessment after that. But let's back up just a little bit. Can the multidisciplinary team decide that a special ed assessment is not needed before the informed consent is ever obtained? Yes, they can. And who gets to decide? Well, you want it to be people who actually have an eye for what a good referral is. And I think I may have told the class this already. I'm not sure if I have or not, but what you don't want to do is to find yourself in a district that has, or on a campus that has lots and lots and lots of referrals that end in D and Q, or do not qualify. Okay. And you'll hear that term, you'll hear D and Q for does not qualify. And those are what I would consider poor or poorer referrals, because whoever made the referral thought that the child was going to be eligible for special services when in fact they weren't. And so there can be a lot of reasons for that, why the person who made the referral, whether it was a teacher, a counselor, a parent, another interested party for whatever reason, thought that the child had a disability, and then it turns out they didn't. It could just be a fluke, and maybe they didn't test well on a particular day and the disability didn't show up, and they really do have a disability. Or more often, the person who made the referral doesn't have a good notion as to what a disability really looks like. And as we've talked about in our other class to some degree, we've got a lot of kids out there who test in that low range, who aren't actually disabled according to the 13 disability categories. So they're, what I would call low and slow, low IQ, low achievement, slow performing, low performing. And that means those kids are going to have difficulty in school, but they're not going to fall into one of our 13 disability categories. So they are going to struggle. But what that indicates to me is that the person who made the referral just doesn't have enough information about what a good referral looks like, what the disability categories are, what a slow learner looks like, and how that looks different than a child with a learning disability, or a child with an intellectual disability, or a child with a lot of other identifiable disabilities. And so we need to be doing a better job on our campuses, alerting people as to what makes a good referral.
Do
So
you have any criteria for that? Like, how can we train teachers for what to look for? Because my principal's been sharing with me our number of DNQs from last school year. And for our district, I think it was at like 46% of kids tested were DNQ. And that seems like a very high number.
yes, that's very high, very high.
So what do we like, what can we do to?
Well, I think the best place to start is kind of where I started with you all in class, is you start with the disability categories. I think a lot of teachers don't realize that there are 13 disability categories and you've got to fit into one of these. I think people just think, okay, that, he's not achieving, and so he needs special ed.
Mm-hmm.
And then they need to know that more than half of all kids with disabilities fall into the learning disability category. And then what is a learning disability? What does that really look like? And they need to know that a learning disability means average or above average intellect with an unexpected underachievement in one of the academic areas. And so you've got to have typical intellect. And so how do we tell if a child has typical intellect? Well, we would want their vocabulary to be like most of the rest of the kids. We would want, all of these other identifiers to look like most of the other kids. If they have, and we would want them generally to have that disability, that suspected disability, in just a couple of those academic areas, not pervasive in every area. Now, I was on a campus today with one of my interns, and they have just called a child, they did call him LD, and it was one of these that I just wanted to shake my head, because I mean, I think I could put this one up on the board for you all right now, as early as you are in your program. And I think you would recognize that this child is not LD. His overall IQ is 74. Now, think about that bell curve that we talked about, okay? So 74 is where? It's down here in this tail. It's real close to that range of ID, isn't it? It's in that borderline IQ range, right? And then his achievement was spotty. There was some down, in the 60s, some in the 70s, some in the 80s. He had one area that spiked up, in the 90s. But they found him to be LD in all academic areas. The academic areas that I showed you, the all three of the reading areas, the one area of written language, both areas of math, and both areas of oral language. Now, is that a specific learning disability? No, that's a general lack of ability in academics and a low IQ. That is not an LD. Now, could you all have called that with the information that you already have in 2 class periods? I think most of you could have. You could have looked at that profile and said, this is not indicative of a typical LD profile. But yet one of our area school districts has called that student LD. That's not LD. And here's the bad thing. You next year may have that child transfer into your school district, and he'll be LD when he gets to you. Because guess what? He lives right around here in the Metroplex. Now, Megan, you won't get him down in Dripping Springs, but our Crowley and Granbury girls could very easily get him. And he's going to come to you and he's going to be identified as LD. But you know what? He does not present as an LD student. He's got low achievement across the board in everything, because he's not LD. He's a slow learner. Okay, so now I've preached a little sermon. We're going to move on. Does that make sense to you though? So, Lindsay, in answer to your question,
it does.
What we've got to do is we've got to teach teachers. We've got to teach teachers the difference between that profile and an LD profile. But what we also have to do is we've got to tell diagnosticians not to qualify those kids. Don't qualify those kids. And we've also, what we have got to do is we've got to recognize that, and this is what you will hear me preach for the next year while you've got me, is special ed is not a gift that we give to kids. And so what we don't want to do is say, oh, but he just needs some help, so let's throw him this life raft and let's give him this gift of a disability label, and that's going to save him. Have you ever seen a kid saved by special ed? It doesn't usually happen. We're not saving him. So, I don't think that mislabeling that student is going to do him any favors. In theory, that child should more likely benefit from an RTI process, a response to intervention, would more likely, according to research, that is the type of child who would more likely benefit from a response to intervention approach. Okay, so there should be a direct relationship between the present levels of performance and the other components of the IEP. Thus, if the statement describes a problem with the child's reading level and points to a deficiency in reading skills, the problem should be addressed under both goals and special education and related services provided to the child. So what's required with assessment? Well, we've got some procedural requirements and some substantive requirements. So our procedural requirements are strict adherence to IDEA procedural requirements. And that is extremely important because major procedural errors by a multidisciplinary team in conducting an assessment may render an IEP inappropriate in the eyes of a hearing officer or judge. So we can make missteps that'll get us in trouble. A thorough and individualized assessment that addresses all areas of a student's needs was conducted by knowledgeable persons and results in the development of an IEP that enable a student to make progress appropriate in light of the student's needs will meet those substantive requirements of the law. So we've got these two different types of requirements that we've got to try to balance. So the assessment must be full and individualized. And we've talked about this a little bit in our other class. So what is full? What does full mean? Does that mean an IQ and achievement in all areas? Well, I think you can argue that point when you get to the other word in this sentence, and that's individualized. If it's individualized, then it's not going to look like everybody else's assessment. So full is debatable. Full, I find it very difficult to define what full means in the law here. I think full can be, I think some districts would define full as a formal standardized cognitive and achievement with all of the subtests administered to every child. And I don't really believe that's what it means. But you will have many districts that will want you to do that. And like I've said in class already, when in Rome, you're going to do as the Romans do. And if they want you to do that, then you do it. But I think you've also got to have in place your good sense and know that a cognitive and achievement battery giving every subtest is not appropriate for every child. So you've got to do what's appropriate and what's going to answer the question that your hypothesis of your evaluation is asking. You've got a team of knowledgeable persons that must make decisions regarding the process and results of the assessment. All too often, I see diagnosticians who are lone wolves out there and who are doing the whole thing by themselves. And that's not the spirit or the letter of the law. There is supposed to be a team of knowledgeable persons who are working together. Assessment information must lead to intervention. And so if what you're doing doesn't lead you to some conclusions that will then impact the student in the classroom, then you haven't done it right. You're just testing for the sake of testing and checking a box. So you've got to be testing with the idea of it leading to something that's going to help the child in the classroom. And that's the whole reason that, like I've said, I think last time we were together, that we have diagnosticians to begin with who have teaching experience. We've got that that classroom element from our teaching backgrounds that helps us to know what's going to help in the general education setting and the special education setting as well. The IEP team must collect meaningful data to then monitor the progress that we hope is going to be made after we finish those evaluations. So there are some protections built into the evaluation procedures. We've got Child Find on the front end that's going to help us to steer us toward the children that do need to be evaluated. We've got to have consent before we can start the process. We've got those steps of pre-referral. We've got steps that lead us up to placement. We've got to have that comprehensive nature of the evaluation process. Evaluators have to be qualified. We have to use standardized instruments, and we have to follow the procedures. And we've talked about that a little bit already in our other class. There are some special rules for determining eligibility. We've got to have, we've got some exclusions that we have to make sure that we rule out, and other things that we have to consider. And we have to make sure that we're not discriminating against the children that we're evaluating by using biased instrumentation. So how about interpreting data? Well, when interpreting evaluation data, the multidisciplinary team must draw on information from a variety of sources. So we can't just use one source of information. And this includes our aptitude, means IQ, aptitude or cognitive and achievement tests, teacher recommendations, physical condition, the information we get from parents, social or cultural background, adaptive behavior. We've got to take all of these things into consideration, and then look at that preponderance of data. Ensure that the information is documented and carefully considered. Ensure that decisions are made by a team, including the person who is knowledgeable about the student. We do want to include parents in our information gathering and in drawing our conclusions. Looking at the meaning of our data, our placement options. Ensuring that the placement decision is made in accordance with that least restrictive environment. We talked about that last week. Now, how about reevaluation? We've been talking about initial evaluations up to this point. There's a question I know about this on your quiz. How often do you have to do a reevaluation? Who knows? Melissa and Megan?
Every 3 years.
Every 3 years, that's right. Every 3 years. Now, I think the question on your quiz says, how often do you have to do a reevaluation? And the answer is 3 years. Some people will probably be thrown off by that, because they'll say, oh, well, no, you don't have to do a reevaluation. You can do a read. And what does read stand for? Anybody know? A review of existing evaluation data. Review of existing evaluation data, REED. Now, I had a student who's doing her internship right now, and I felt really bad for her. She got on the job and did not understand some of the differences between a read and a reevaluation. And we went over this last spring, but I think it just was foreign to her. And so it didn't make sense until she got on the job this fall. And so we're going to talk about that more in class this year. But especially for those of you who don't have a special ed background, this will be something that you need to, pay close attention to. And even if you have taught special ed, if you're not on the evaluation side, doing testing, it's not nearly as meaningful to you as when you get in there and you're expected to do it. We are required to do a reevaluation to look at a child's continuation of eligibility every 3 years. And that's what the question on your quiz is getting at. But a number of years ago, maybe, I don't know, 15 years or so ago, no, it's been more than that. It was at about 2009. Oh, no, it was in 97. That's when it was. In 97, with the reauthorization of IDEA, the rule changed about reevaluations. Up to that point, we had to have a formal reevaluation every 3rd year. And at that point in 97, the law changed with the reauthorization of IDEA. And the rule said now do something that's less formal. We don't have to do formal evaluation. We can do informal evaluation, and we can look at the data that we already have and decide if we need formal data or not. And so that's what a read is. It's a review of the existing data that you already have. And the committee can determine whether or not they want to get any additional data. And if they do, then they can have a formal reevaluation, or if they don't want to, they can take the information they already have. And what most ARD committees say is we're going to roll this forward, and they're going to take the data they already have, and they're going to continue that child's eligibility based upon pre-existing information. But you need to have that conversation before you get to that child's 3-year anniversary ARD. And I think that's what threw my intern this year off. She had reevaluations coming up that she didn't know where they were in that process of whether or not they had that conversation about formal evaluation or not. So you've got to know where those students who are coming up on a reevaluation are. Have they already had the conversation about reevaluation, or is that upcoming? Have they determined that they need formal data, or are they taking the data that they already had and just kind of rolling it forward? So that's a key element that you need to know about all of your 3 years when you start your job. But a reevaluation is a comprehensive evaluation conducted on a student already in special ed. The IDEA therefore requires that students in special ed be reevaluated every 3 years unless the parent and school district agree that a reevaluation is not needed. And parents may request a reevaluation at any time. The reevaluation is usually similar to the original pre-placement evaluation, and it must meet the same procedural requirements under IDEA as the original evaluation did. Now let's talk for just a minute about IEEs, an independent educational evaluation. If the family of the child disagrees with the school district's evaluation, the parents have a right to request an independent evaluation, and the district has to pay for that. Now, the IEE will be conducted by someone outside the school district that's qualified, and the school district can present the family with a list of qualified examiners, but the family doesn't have to choose from that list. They can choose someone of their own liking, but the district has to approve of that person. So you can't just, go choose the most expensive person. The district and the family has to agree on that person. On our practice test that I share with you next spring, there's a question about this that says, does the family get to, take the money from the school district and go pay somebody? No, they don't get a voucher or anything like that. The school district and the independent evaluator work out a payment between them, and the parent never sees any money. It doesn't work like that at all. Payment is worked out completely between the district and the independent evaluator. There's only one IEE per evaluation. So if it's a 3-year reevaluation and the student got a cognitive and an achievement test, and the parent said, I disagree, well, then they could have a cognitive and an achievement as part of the IEE. Let's say that they said, well, I don't agree with that. I want another IEE. Well, they can't have another IEE. They can only have one IEE for any given test. Now, if somewhere during that next year, let's say the school district says, well, we want to test the student for autism, and the parent disagrees with that, well, then they could ask for an independent evaluation for the autism that's separate from the cognitive and achievement that they already had the IEE for. Let's see. The school district, and this bottom one is important. I think there's a quiz question about this. The school district is under no obligation to accept the results of the IEE. The key word here is they have to consider it. The school district must consider the IEE as part of the decision, but they don't have to accept, but they do have to consider the results in their decision-making. Now, this is different than when a parent brings an evaluation to the school and says, I have an evaluation from an outside source. I want you to pay for this. That's not the way it works at all. A parent is only entitled to an IEE if the district has already done an evaluation on a particular area and the parent disagrees with that. The parent can't go, let's say Johnny is a student with a learning disability and he's been evaluated for that. He's being served for an LD, and the parent goes to an outside agency and gets an autism evaluation and comes back and says, I had an autism evaluation. I want you all to pay for it. That's not the way it works. The parent would have to request an autism evaluation in the school district. The school district would have to do one. The parent would have to disagree with that and then get an IEE for an autism evaluation. You have all these steps that you have to go through. High school exit exams are another area altogether. Students are entitled to accommodations on those if those are allowable, and on most they are. Students with disabilities are counted in those accountability listings. There's a website here that you can look at if you're interested in more of that. Some principles that are important from litigation and legislation. Ensure that administrators, special ed teachers, general ed teachers, and evaluation personnel understand the importance of the identification and assessment process. And I think this is critical. And you who are going to be diagnosticians need to realize that you are a conduit of information. You are a liaison between general ed and special ed with this whole process once you become a diagnostician. So you're a key element of this sharing of information. Don't use a school-wide RTI or multi-tiered system of support program or pre-referral interventions to delay or deny special ed evaluation. There have been several due process cases where the plaintiff, the family, has won against a school district because a child has been caught in that RTI hamster wheel and not allowed out of it for way too long to get a special ed evaluation, because they keep going round and round and round on these tiers of intervention. 12 weeks at this level and 12 weeks at the next level and 12 until I've heard of some kids that spent a whole year in RTI when the parents were wanting a special ed evaluation. And so don't find yourself in a district that's doing that. Help people understand that is a recipe for trouble with hearing officers if kids are just left to languish in RTI. Principle 3, involve a student's parents in the assessment process. Make sure that they know that their opinions and their input is valued and considered at every point along the way. Use a variety of assessment instruments to allow the team to determine eligibility. Don't get in that habit of just using your favorites and just doing that over and over because it's easy or it's lightweight or any of those kind of things. And conduct relevant and meaningful assessments that will help the IEP team plan student special education programs. And that's the end of our PowerPoint. So what questions do you have tonight, ladies? Hi, Tina. I didn't see you. You weren't on my screen.
I have a question.
Okay. What you got?
Once a student has been evaluated and come to a particular diagnosis that's not correct, can it be changed before a reevaluation?
The diagnosis is incorrect.
Yes.
Who says it's incorrect?
Well, like say, like how you were just looking at something and maybe they came to us and it's not like what we would say would be correct.
Well, I think if the person who gave the diagnosis doesn't think it's incorrect, then you got an issue, you know. If I'm thinking if a psychologist says, here's my diagnosis and puts it on a child, and the rest of the team maybe thinks it's incorrect, it's hard to get that kind of thing off until you have a different psychologist on the team. I don't know if that's the kind of thing you're thinking about, or if you're thinking of a situation like where somebody makes an error in the diagnosis and then says, oops, my bad, I shouldn't have called that child eligible when he was, or I didn't call him eligible when he, or when he wasn't, or something like that. Then those situations you should certainly make every effort to correct sooner than later. If you, I have found that sometimes the egos of evaluators are huge, and getting somebody to admit a mistake in an evaluation is a big hurdle. And not just psychologists, diagnosticians, speech pathologists, people who do evaluations don't like to think they're wrong. But if it's a blatant error, then, and certainly if a student is being hurt or damaged in any way by the label, then we've got to call it out and take care of it. According to procedure, there shouldn't be another evaluation for 3 years, but you can request a reevaluation before then. We don't usually do evaluations more frequently than the 3rd year, because that's when it's required.
I have a question, Dr. Kevin.
Okay.
Kind of going along with Tanika's question. Last year, my partner and I referred a kid. And I think a lot of our referrals that I've done in the past is because I didn't know. I didn't know about the 13 categories and a lot of those things. So we referred this kid. He qualified, but he mastered STAR math and STAR reading. So I was trying to think about, I kept talking about it to my partner as we were referring him, and he just needed some other supports. I didn't think he needed to be referred, but I went along with it because she kind of thought he needed to, and I didn't think I knew enough.
Mhm.
So what do you do in that situation where the kid did so well, and then after we did it and his scores came back, I went back to our not to our diagnostician, but one of the ladies that that was on our team, and I was like, I told you this kid did not need to be in here, but it seems like he's stuck at this point. Is
Right.
that correct?
Well, I think if you can be an advocate for a student that should be dismissed, you need to be. And maybe this dovetails into Tanika's question too. If you can be an advocate for a student that you believe needs to be dismissed from special ed, you need to be. And so let's just say the case you're talking about, Tina, I would say you need to go to bat for that student and say to the team, to the diagnostician, to whoever, and see, this is where personalities get involved and it gets sticky, because I don't know if you were on early on, Tina, when I was talking about the district where I was today, where they're qualifying this
Yes.
kid with a 74 IQ. And, you've got a diagnostician there who's mentoring my student, who has obviously, who thinks it's okay to qualify this kid with a 74 IQ as an LD. And so you risk stepping on somebody's toes by saying he shouldn't be in. So in the case that you're talking about, whoever qualified him, why did they qualify him? Did the scores come out clean and he really did qualify that day? Or did somebody fudge a little bit here or there to try to get him in? Now, I haven't said this in our other class yet, and I'll say it right now to you all, and I'll probably repeat myself again and again. You can always find a test to make something happen if you want it to happen bad enough, okay? So if you want a kid to get in to special ed, you can find a test out there and you can get them in. Now, is that the right thing to do? No. If you want a kid to stay out of special ed, you can find a test that will keep him out of special ed. But is that the right thing to do? No. You've got to approach every single case with your ethics strongly intact, trying to get to the bottom of the case at hand and say, okay, I want to know the true story of what's going on here. And I'm going to give this student the test that is most accurately going to reflect his true ability. And I know in my heart of hearts that this test over here is going to show him to do better than he truly does. And this test over here is going to depress his scores. And so if I choose this test, this is going to get him in, and this test is going to keep him out. But I'm going to choose this test that's going to give the most accurate representation of his true ability. And so you've got to decide, because you're going to find yourself sometimes to have lots and lots of power to do things that are wrong. And like I've told you already, you're going to have people pushing on you. You're going to have administrators saying, he really needs to be in, or she really needs to be out. And you've got to find that core inside yourself that says, I am not going to bend to pressure, and I'm going to do the right thing by students. And sometimes you're, the little devil over here and the angel over here are going to be warring to convince you of the best thing to do. But, at the end of the day, I think you've got to go back to, why did you get into this profession to start with? And hopefully it was to help children and to be an advocate for students who need an advocate in their corner to help them to learn more effectively. And you can be that person, but not by abusing test instruments, and it can be done. Unfortunately, it can be done, and people do it every day, and it infuriates me. And I'm sure that there are students of mine out there who do it, and that makes me kind of nauseous. But I want you to know that going in, that's a risk of the field, that the tests can be abused and they can be manipulated, and you don't want to be that person that does it. So I think that you can be an advocate for the student that has been mislabeled, and go forward and say, I think this student could be successful outside of special ed, and let's give him all the supports that we can. I think it was, a week or two ago, we talked about Section 504. And, once you've been labeled special ed, according to 504, you always have a disability, because you have been known to be disabled. And so once special ed always 504. Always 504. And so accommodations are yours forever, even if you're dismissed from special ed. And so that's something that you can be assured that a student would have if they are exited from special ed. And I think we've got to ask ourselves, what benefit is special ed doing for a student on any given day? And is it something that when we weigh the benefit, is it something that they need to hang on to? And if not, do what you can to advocate for dismissal with those supports in place that will help them to be successful. Tanika, does that help answer your question at all?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. All right. What other questions might you all have?
I
Oh,
had one. So
yeah.
we've talked about and we read about the timeline at the beginning, once you receive consent for an evaluation.
Mhm.
What about at the end, after you've completed the evaluation and before you go to art? I know there's some kind of timeline there.
Yes,
And-
and it is oh golly, is it? Why did you ask me that today?
I'm sorry. I just hadn't read it yet and I knew that there
I have
was.
had it memorized for so many years. It's is it 30 calendar? I gotta get back to you.
Okay, that's fine.
I've had a big old brain, um,
I have brain farts all the time. It's okay.
I've had a brain fart. I've had a brain fart. I will get back with you.
Okay.
I,
thank you.
I can't believe I don't remember it right this second.
No, you're fine.
I should know this. It's a standard question. All right, I'm gonna get back with you. Okay,
Thank you.
all right. Anything else? All right, the quiz is gonna open up in the next little bit. Let me look at it real quick and see if there's anything I need to tell you about on it. Okay. The evaluation process is individualized. We want to link assessment and intervention. We reevaluate every 3 years.
Dr. Cavan, I'm thinking that the test between if we're talking about initial evaluation, it's 30 calendar days. If
30
that's what you're-
calendar.
Between the initial evaluation and the R, we have 30 calendar days after completion.
Okay, 30 calendar. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Megan. You get extra points.
That ECS kicking in. And I think it's 45 days from like referral, right? Am I mistaken?
I think you're, oh, no, it's 60, isn't it?
I think it's 60 for IDA, but I think when I looked at the framework on Region 18, I think it's 45 in Texas. I think it says in our text, it says states sometimes have a shorter timeline.
Okay,
30 or
there's
45.
there's a question on your quiz about that, so look that up, okay? This says, according to IDEA, the federal timeline to complete an evaluation after parental consent has been received is, and I think that's 60 days. You know what? I'm gonna go double check that before I open this quiz. There's a question about the California case that prohibited the use of IQ tests as the sole criteria to place African-American children in classes for students labeled as educably mentally retarded. Do y'all remember that one? That's Larry P.
Larry P, yeah.
Okay. And I know we don't say mentally retarded now, but they did then. So that's why it's written that way. There's a question about all those requirements when assessing a student for special ed. Using multiple procedures. Tailoring the assessment to access specific areas of educational need. Providing the assessment in their native language. Using the assessment materials the way they've been designed. And then, the last question, when making an eligibility determination, the multidisciplinary team must do which of the following in making the eligibility decision? And you have to pick 3 answers. And they're all, very team-based. Rely on the team's professional judgment. Ensure that the information is documented and carefully considered. And draw on the results of all the information gathered. That's kind of logical. That is a precious little child. You are so cute.
And say hi. Say hi.
All right. Ladies, anything else? Okay, I'm gonna turn you loose. 2 more weeks, this week and 1 more.
Yay.
Okay, you're loving the law class, aren't you? Loving it.
Yes.
All right. Okay, I'll let y'all go.
Thank you, Dr. Kevin.
You bet. We'll see y'all.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank
Hey.
you.
Bye-bye. Thank y'all for being here.